What if I told you that one small country thousands of miles away can push Washington to act against its own interests, and that no other nation in history has held this kind of influence over a global superpower? In this explosive conversation between Tucker Carlson and political scientist John Mearsheimer, nothing is off the table. From Israel's grip on U.S. policy, to NATO's self-inflicted disaster in Ukraine, to how America accidentally created its biggest rival in China, we have 10 powerful takeaways that will change how you see world politics forever. Let's dive straight into them. Takeaway 1. Why Israel comes first. Mearsheimer explains that when the interests of the United States and Israel clash, Washington almost always takes Israel's side. He says there has never been another case in recorded history where a great power has subordinated its own policy so consistently to the interests of another state. The example he gives is the two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. Every American president from Jimmy Carter onward has claimed it is in the U.S. interest to create a Palestinian state to bring peace to the Middle East. Yet Israel has resisted it for decades, and the U.S. has done nothing to force the issue. Instead, the reality on the ground has moved toward a greater Israel with no room for a Palestinian state. Mearsheimer says the driving force behind this is the Israel Lobby, an extraordinarily powerful network that influences policy decisions in Washington. He is blunt in saying that in situations where American and Israeli interests do not align, policy still bends toward Israel. This is not about shared values or military alliances, but about raw political pressure. That is the kind of power Mearsheimer says Israel holds in Washington. Takeaway 2. How the Israel lobby works. According to Mearsheimer, the lobby operates on two levels. One is shaping policy directly through political donations, lobbying, and close relationships with policymakers. The other is controlling public discourse so that supporting Israel always appears to be in America's interest. For decades, this meant suppressing historical facts about the displacement of Palestinians in 1948 and portraying Israel as the underdog in a hostile region. Anyone who spoke openly about these issues risked being labeled anti-Semitic or disloyal. In recent years, more Americans have become aware of this gap between the official story and reality, but the lobby's grip on actual policy remains strong. Mearsheimer emphasizes that no U.S. president has been willing to challenge it head-on because the political cost would be too high. This means the cycle continues, regardless of who occupies the White House. Takeaway 3. What is happening in Gaza? Turning to Gaza, Mearsheimer calls Israel's military campaign a genocide under the definition from the 1948 Convention, which includes the intent to destroy part or all of a national or ethnic group. He says this is not simply killing civilians as part of war, like the firebombing of Tokyo or Dresden in World War II, but a deliberate attempt to destroy Palestinian identity itself. After the October 7th attacks, Israeli leaders saw an opportunity to empty Gaza of its 2.3 million Palestinians, either into Egypt or Jordan, just as large-scale expulsions happened in 1948 and after the 1967 war. But when Palestinians did not leave, the military campaign intensified, killing tens of thousands. Mearsheimer says this is linked to Israel's long-standing goal of keeping a Jewish majority in Greater Israel. The United States, by supplying weapons and political cover, is directly complicit. Takeaway 4. The Greater Israel Vision. The idea of Greater Israel goes back to early Zionist leaders like David Ben-Gurion, who in 1918 described a Jewish state that would include not only today's Israel, but also Gaza, the West Bank, parts of Lebanon, Syria, the Sinai Peninsula, and Jordan. Israel has never defined its final borders because it wants to keep the option of expansion open. Mearsheimer says this vision is not just about adding land, but also ensuring that neighboring states are weak or fractured. Syria's civil war and Lebanon's instability are seen as strategic advantages for Israel. In the case of Egypt and Jordan, the U.S. provides huge amounts of aid, partly to make sure they stay cooperative with Israeli interests. He points out the hypocrisy in U.S. foreign policy. In Ukraine, Washington claims borders are sacred, but in the Middle East, it supports a policy of redrawing them when it benefits Israel. We're about to dive into the most exciting part of this video. If you're enjoying it, hit the thumbs up below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. It really helps us keep making great content. Don't forget to leave a comment and hit subscribe for more. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 5. Why U.S. policy is addicted to war. Mearsheimer says the U.S. foreign policy establishment, regardless of party, is committed to a hawkish approach. They want the largest military possible and are quick to use it. This is partly ideological, and partly because it serves the interests of allies like Israel, which benefits from a ready-to-act U.S. military presence in the region. The mindset is that force can spread democracy and remake societies, as seen in the Iraq War and other interventions. This addiction to military action often ignores the long-term costs to America itself. Takeaway 6. Why Ukraine is losing. On Ukraine, Mearsheimer says the Russians are winning, and there is no path for Ukraine to reverse the situation. Russia has more troops, more weapons, and the political will to outlast the West. Ukraine relies almost entirely on Western support, but the West is not willing to meet Russia's key demands. These demands are that Ukraine stay out of NATO, be demilitarized, and give up territories Russia has annexed. The longer the war goes on, the more territory Ukraine will lose, and the more lives will be destroyed. National pride keeps Ukraine fighting. But Mearsheimer believes cutting a deal now would save both land and lives. Takeaway 7. The West's strange Russophobia. Mearsheimer says Western hostility to Russia is not based on real strategic threats, but on an emotional bias, especially among political elites. He compares it to the Monroe Doctrine, where the U.S. would never accept foreign troops in Mexico or Canada, yet expects Russia to accept NATO forces in Ukraine. He dismisses the idea that Russia wants to conquer all of Europe as absurd, given its struggles to control even parts of Ukraine. Takeaway 8. How NATO expansion caused disaster. NATO expanded eastward after the Cold War, moving the U.S. security umbrella from Western Europe to Eastern Europe. Russia tolerated some expansion, but drew the line at Ukraine. In 2008, NATO declared Ukraine would eventually join, despite knowing it could trigger a major conflict. Instead of backing down, the U.S. pushed ahead, leading to the 2014 Crimea crisis, and eventually the 2022 invasion. Mearsheimer says the refusal to change course came from a belief that showing weakness would be worse than risking war. Takeaway 9. How China became a rival. After the Cold War, the U.S. helped China grow economically, believing it would become a friendly democracy. Instead, China used its new wealth to become a military and economic rival. Mearsheimer says this was one of the greatest strategic mistakes in modern history. Wars in Ukraine and the Middle East have prevented the U.S. from focusing on containing China. Worse, U.S. policy has driven Russia and China closer together. Takeaway 10. Why this matters globally. Mearsheimer warns that America's overcommitment to multiple conflicts is weakening its position in the world. Supporting Israel unconditionally, fighting a losing war in Ukraine, and facing a rising China all at once stretches U.S. power thin. Rivals are cooperating more closely, while allies question American judgment. The pattern is of a country that refuses to adjust its strategies even after repeated failures. If nothing changes, the next decade could bring even more costly wars and a further loss of influence. He leaves the audience with the challenge of asking whether America can still act in its own interest rather than someone else's. This conversation is a direct challenge to the comforting myths many people hold about American power and alliances. Mearsheimer does not sugarcoat the reality that U.S. foreign policy often serves another nation's interests before its own, and that this has consequences from Gaza to Ukraine to the South China Sea. Whether you agree with him or not, the facts he presents demand attention. So here is the question to leave you with. If a superpower cannot act in its own best interest, how long can it remain a superpower at all? Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support this channel, hit the thanks button below. It really helps us keep going. If you enjoyed this summary, please leave a like and share it in your WhatsApp groups. To join discussion about this video, drop a comment below. And for more videos like this, hit the subscribe button below.